Hello, I'm Sheridan from Cemetery Walks UK, and I'm in Amington Cemetery, which is just outside Tamworth. You can see the gates of the cemetery behind me, and if I swing around, there is the sign which tells you a little bit about where we are. This cemetery was created in 1914 and was consecrated in March, and the first burial took place in April. We're going to go and find the grave of Joseph Holmes, the first burial, shortly, but I'll take you for a little walk around the graveyard first. So you can see this is a fairly conventional council layout cemetery. We've got a central avenue here and 4 main areas with the cross in the centre. Shall we walk straight up the middle first? So to our left now are the most recent burials. That is area D. In fact, a little while ago I was talking to somebody who'd just lost his wife and buried her very recently. So there are still burials taking place here, but it is almost full. So in this part of the world we have typically these brown posts. Let's show you, there we go, to indicate the different areas of the graveyard. So D there, C in that corner, B in that corner, which is the oldest part, and A over here. And this is a cross of sacrifice for the fallen, people who died from the Amington area during the First World War. It says this cross is erected to the memory of the fallen heroes of Amington, presented to this cemetery by E.J. Cole, Tamworth in 1917, so before the war had ended, which is unusual. And some more names here. It looks as if the Second World War wasn't included on this one, just the First World War. Some more names. And the final side here. It's subtle but beautiful, I think. Some crosses are very stark, and this one does seem to have quite a bit of detail to it. It's rather nice. And then over here there's a really useful board. This marks the fallen of Amington in 1914 to 1918, and you've got all the names and where they died. On this side, and then one man buried in Amington Cemetery, Frederick Stokes of the North Staffordshire Regiment. He was demobilised in 1919 and he died on the 1st of September 1919, a year after the war ended, from meningitis caused by gas poisoning. They've got their own website, it says, at amingtonwarmemorial.com. I will have a look at that later. I've done quite a lot of World War I research. Okay, let's have a little wander around over this way. First of all, I want to show you where Joseph Holmes is buried. He was buried right on this corner. Obviously they chose a spot that was going to be prominent, suitable for all the visiting dignitaries, and he is there in an unmarked grave. Rather sad, and I don't know whether he had children from a previous wife, but the wife he had when he died was Elizabeth. They lived in School Lane in Amington, And they didn't have any children between them. They were married for 17 years, and he was 68 when he died, so it's not surprising they didn't have children. They would have got together when he was, 51, and she was a very similar age. So whether he had children from a previous wife, I don't know. He was a minor, so with no children living with them at the time, certainly not in the 1911 census, and not at the time of his death, it's unsurprising that there isn't a stone. There's nobody who would have done a stone for them. His wife Elizabeth is just over here in that space diagonally opposite, so probably about as close as she could get at the time. And there's Joseph's space there. So he died on the 26th of April 1914, and he was buried 3 days later on the 29th. And that was just a month after the cemetery was consecrated. Let's walk on up to the end of the avenue. So again, we've got the newer graves on the left and the older graves on the right. This was a small mining village when the graveyard was built, not that big at all. So it's grown an awful lot since then. It's now got a huge amount of suburb to Tamworth. And it's hardly surprising that they had to consider building a new graveyard here. I think the first reference I found to it in the papers that they were planning one was in 1911. One of the sites they were looking at was an orchard. I'm not sure if it was this site that they used in the end, but they were busy discussing which site to use. So now we've got right at the end of the graveyard now. Not particularly huge, as you can see, but very pleasant. And when it was built, I don't know if you can see the roofs of the houses over there. There were no houses here at that time. No houses behind me. There's a little row of Victorian properties over that way, and none of those houses would have been here. It would have been literally in the middle of fields. And not unusually for Tamworth, we've got what looks like an allotment over here. I don't think that's gardens, but several of the graveyards have allotments next to them here. We seem to be by some of the more recent children's graves here, so I'll leave those alone and we'll walk round the older graves. I'm always happy to visit and photograph a grave if somebody wants me to, but I don't like spending too much time where there are recent burials. I do try to explain to people why I'm here, the fact that I'm taking photographs for people who have specifically requested them. I usually show them my little clipboard so that people know exactly what's going on, why I'm wandering around the graveyard with a camera. So today I was also photographing graves for the Goring family. There was a lady who requested them on Find a Grave, and I found 3 plots for her, 2 of which were marked, which was nice. I can see a Commonwealth War Graves grave just over here, so let's wander over and have a look at that. So this one is Able Seaman C. Gorton, and he died on the 14th of May 1945, aged 28. He served on HMS Copra. I can see another one over here. Let's head towards that. This is Lance Corporal A. Wilson of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment, and he died on the 13th of July 1942, aged 24. So he was very young. And those are the only two Commonwealth War Graves stones that I can see here. Let's just circle round again to be sure. No, there are no others. Ah, there's one in this area over here. This is in section A. So this is Guardsman M.K. Shaw of the 2nd Battalion Coldstream Guards, who died in 1973, aged 23. Can't quite see what it says there. Sadly missed and always remembered by his family and friends. So an interesting thing I discovered recently was that these markers here are council installed. You used to be able to put a stone on top of them, but not anymore, and they're 3 foot by 1 foot. And you can quite often see them with a name on them. Pending a later stone to be installed. And I'm not seeing any more Commonwealth War graves here. Here's a whole row of these stones. The more recent graves. And it says pre-select grave number 770A. So that's one that's already been reserved. These are quite recent, in the 2000s, all of them. We walk back into the centre again for the final time. I've just noticed that, remember I told you that Joseph Holmes was buried just over there on that corner, and it looks like another corner was reserved for somebody over here. I shall look up later who this was and what the significance was of this particular grave. So this says, "Pray for the soul of Ellen, the beloved wife of John Spooner. Died September the 3rd, 1918, aged 66. So 4 years after this graveyard was consecrated. They must have reserved this space for some reason. Well, thank you for joining me here today. I hope you'll come again on one of my walks. I've got plenty to look up on Ancestry when I get home. I want to investigate a few of the names I've seen here today. Thanks for joining me at Amington Cemetery. Bye for now.